A very beautiful community. This is an important video. You might say, Vlad, what are you talking about? You're going to talk about Bill Maher going to visit Trump in the White House. You're going to tell me that's an important video, sitting here with your pretty yellow flowers, and it's going to be an important video about Bill Maher in the White House. Yeah, it is. Not because we're going to judge how cool or uncool it was of Maher to do that and present it the way he did, or we'll do that too, but because we'll go deeper and analyze the dynamics and risk of conciliatoriness when your society is taking authoritarian turns. Now, let's brace ourselves, because I'm only sitting up for a brief period of time. Just in the last few hours, my resting heart rate has gone from 30 to 150 and back, and I'm struggling with significant issues. So hopefully we can get through, and maybe even get through without oxygen for the next 10-15 minutes. So may the force be with us. What we're going to do is just read 2 or 3 quotes that I have cut out for us from Bill Maher's 13-minute explanation of his trip to the White House. This is my first quarter cup of a decaf coffee I'm having with you, beautiful community, since the hospital. And then we'll do analysis that goes to the core of democratic societies in decline, taking authoritarian turns, and public figures fearfully and preemptively balancing resistance and conciliatoriness. And when we do that, we'll talk about 3 things I think Bill Maher got wrong in his presentation. We'll talk about the very basic concepts at hand here, like what's going on. We'll talk about fear, and we'll talk about the effect of Bill Maher's visit and his account of his visit. But first, let's read a little bit of Bill Maher. Quote, "We were walking through the White House and must have been talking about something to do with the 2020 election, because I know he used the word lost. And I distinctly remember saying, 'Wow, I never thought I'd hear you say that.' And he didn't get mad." Now let's intervene here. Now, as a matter of biographical fact, Trump, who has said the word lost about the 2020 election in public, including on the Joe Rogan podcast, Trump doesn't believe he lost. Remember that. Remember how even a very impulsive authoritarian like Trump, with very few definite beliefs, but many dispositional states that float about, even he begins to believe the stuff that it's convenient for him to believe. So on a scale of it's just a flat lie and he believes it all the way through, we're closer, right, on Trump's false claims about the 2020 election to here than to here. He's much more self-aware than he lets on in public. Look, I get it. It doesn't matter who he is at a private dinner with a comedian. It matters who he is on the world stage. I'm just taking it as a positive that this person exists, because everything I've ever not liked about him was, I swear to God, absent, at least on this night with this guy. As in, with this guy, Bill Maher. Of course, human qualities are never absent. And it's actually my own view, following the great philosopher Richard Wolheim, that even great artists who go through many evolutions in their work across their career, like Beethoven or Picasso, retain the same style across their career. And Trump's the same Trump. It was yesterday, that it was the day before. It's the same Trump in every context. Let's go on. Bill went on to say, I voted for Clinton and Obama, but I'd never feel comfortable talking to them the way I was able to talk to Donald Trump. I'm just reporting what I saw over 2.5 hours. For over 2.5 hours. I went into the mine, and that's what's down there. A crazy person does not live in the White House. A person who plays crazy, who plays a crazy person on TV a lot, lives there, which I know is effed up, but it's not as effed up as I thought it was. Now, I don't have a good feeling, and I'll be critical about a lot of things he does. The trade war, disappearing people, ruling by decree, threatening judges, gutting the government with glee. And I'm not going to pull any punches around the idea that presidents get to propose a third term for themselves. He understands that and understands it without animus. That doesn't mean he's not going to do it, though. Laugh. So, MAGA fans, don't worry. Your boy gave me nothing, just hats. Hats and a very generous amount of time and a willingness to listen and accept me as a possible friend, even though I'm not MAGA, which was, of course, the point of the dinner. So Bill Maher set false expectations about Trump and then showed them defeated, firstly. Secondly, he said insubstantial things and made substantial conclusions from them. And thirdly, he invoked the idea of a madman in the White House that actually just obscures the very issues we need to understand. So let's say a little bit about each. So Maher set false expectations about Trump and then showed them being defeated. There's nothing strange about Trump being civil and humorous with Bill Maher. Moreover, Trump, who seeks conflict in public, is avoidant of conflict in private. Partly that's because of his neurodiversity. He isn't confident he can handle a conflictive situation in private in the way he would like. He prefers not to deal with that. The Bill Maher Trump describes is the Trump many people have seen. It's the Trump from the Bob Woodward interviews, Bob Woodward interview tapes. So there is absolutely nothing surprising about Trump being jovial and engaging with Maher. Second, Maher said insubstantial things and implied substantial conclusions from them. It's not a substantial thing to say that Trump was nice to him. I mean, before going into politics, all kinds of people could have been nice. All kinds of war criminals could have been nice. When Karadzic, the war criminal, ran a psychiatric hospital, I don't know how he ran it, but he may in principle have not run it in a terribly unethical way. But when he was thrust into politics, all kinds of other bad stuff followed. There's no conflict here. Just like there is no conflict in the, idea of a Trump before politics being welcomed onto shows like The View and sort of with a bit of skepticism adored. Just like there is no conflict between the behavior of Mr. Putin and the fact that right now Mr. Witkoff is enjoying Mr. Putin's hospitality and his engaged politeness. Moreover, Mr. Putin has certain ethical principles in the way he deals with people in his private life, unless they become his political enemies. Putin is actually more decent to people in his private life than Trump is under particular circumstances. For example, if you did something that's a favor to Putin 20 years ago and you're not his political enemy, he'll go out of his way to get something done for you, even if it's against his interests. That's not in conflict with Putin doing what he's doing in Ukraine. That's not in conflict with Putin driving Russia off a cliff. There isn't a conflict there, right? Funky fun tea with Orban is not something that conflicts with Orban's authoritarian politics. So the problem there is not just that funky fun in private doesn't conflict with ghastliness in public. The problem also is that Trump isn't just another president. There is a more, as Ezra Klein likes to say, totalizing effect to the political transformation Trump's bringing. And jovial, personal, funky fun being emphasized the way Maher does it actually obscures the fact that Trump isn't a president like others. Maher invoked the notion of the madman. Trump's mad, but he's not mad. What Trump is a guy with a personality disorder that's exacerbated by some neurodiversity that can often fuel good or bad traits people have. That's not mad, but it also is mad in the sense that Trump, for instance, did the tariffs without any capacity to engage in conversation with his circle about what the consequences would be, because he couldn't bear taking advice on things he doesn't already understand. So madness obscures these things, right? Trump's spectacular narcissistic challenge means that he acts in all kinds of ways that are profoundly unsuitable for public office. Trump's authoritarian tendency is profoundly unsuitable for public office. That's compatible with having a joke and a giggle with Trump on the golf course. Concepts. This is really basic, but it's deep, but basic. Some deep things are not basic. Some deep things are basic. These deep things are basic. Power, if you understand Thucydides, if you understand Machiavelli, if you understand the great tradition, certainly in our culture in the West, of thinking about politics, extraordinarily, naturally goes together with self-deception. The allure of power is extraordinary, and it is not to be underestimated. The President of the United States is an extraordinarily powerful person, a person whose power is restricted in many ways, but is an extraordinarily powerful person. Drunkenness on power is something that is unfortunately available to most humans, including humans who think it wouldn't affect them. Suddenly they begin to restructure the way they form their thoughts. Suddenly they begin to make an allowance here, an alteration there. Then they forget that they've done the alteration and the allowance and make the next alteration and allowance. Power and self-deception go together. Proximity to power and self-deception go together very, very naturally. You are always at risk because the light is so bright. You're always at risk of thinking that the right direction is where the light shines. Where the light shines has nothing to do with the right direction. right? It could be that the right direction is over there and it's not illuminated, but the intoxicating light, right, with which power illuminates its path, makes it tempting to begin seeing things its way. That's very, very, very important to understand. Drunkenness on power is one of the most, drunkenness on access to power is one of the most natural human dispositions. And relatedly, right, power and an inappropriate excess of conciliatoriness go together very, very naturally, right? To get a seat at the table, you let go, not necessarily some beliefs, but some of the ways you frame things, some of the ways you emphasize one side over another, and so on. Excessive conciliatoriness and proximity to power in an age-old way go together. Now, let's say something about Maher's status, because it's difficult to talk about whether he should or shouldn't have gone to the White House, because the question comes, as what? Right? Certainly, I can tell you that cultural actors with serious intellectual or philosophical pretense, seeking influence or protection from power, or seeking power to a power that might scare them to go soft on them, undermines integrity and moral clarity. Now, Bill Maher is an entertainer. And that's a strange concept in our culture, because we live in a culture where we take an excessively democratic view of art. We think many more things are art which aren't. And we take an excessively dismissive view of entertainment. That's to say, a lot of entertainment actually has a lot of depth and is still just entertainment. We tend to think that entertainment that has a bit of depth becomes art. So it's not an insult to Bill Maher that he is a comedian and an intellectual entertainer. And so for that individual, it's harder to frame an ethic than it would be for some kind of public moralist or for some kind of public intellectual or public philosopher or whatever. The great art critic David Sylvester in the middle of the 20th century, who started as a child reviewing sport, and is typical for the psychology of a critic. He was reviewing sport he didn't see. Used to say that we should review movies like sport, not like art, except for the art movies, right? So you can review, in more recent times, Bergman or Buñuel as art, but the vast majority of movies with depth are not art, they're entertainment. And there is also, of course, something utterly absurd when Hollywood actors sit around and discuss the plots of their films as though that's a set of consequential public events. No, it's consequential because it might be really good or really bad entertainment. But that's all it is. It's entertainment. So that's what Bill Maher is, and so it's difficult to talk about an ethic that's appropriate to that. Let's now talk about fear. Is Bill Maher genuinely afraid of retribution from Trump? I mean, Trump tried to sue him at one point, and Bill Maher has criticized Trump a lot in public. Now, Maher did say, in a way I don't want to contextualize because I don't fully understand its meaning, that he was shitting himself about Trump's victory, and that he said he might be bored with it, bored with the idea of endlessly attacking Trump. A few people have read something into that. I don't know what to read into that. So I think that it's unfair to say that that's a case of if you can't beat him, then just, reconcile with him. I don't think that's fair. But I do think it's important to consider the thought that if your resistance has failed, it may be because you didn't resist in the right way rather than because resisting wasn't worth it. But fundamentally, what I'd say is that Trump is trying to create an atmosphere of fear, and that the situation is escalating. Don't judge the authoritarianism of the Trump administration by what you're seeing today, because this is a moving picture, and it's a picture that's moving in one direction only. And that's toward an escalation of what I would call pointillistic picking on enemies within. First, you might pick on some weak ones, but then you could pick on a stronger one to make an example out of them. More of that than has happened so far is to come with the Trump administration. We're not talking necessarily about the end of US democracy, we're certainly talking about authoritarian escalation. And let's be clear, privately, are some journalists in the United States a bit fearful? Yep. Are opponents of Trump potentially at some risk that's more than just career risk? Yep. It's child's play compared to being Putin's enemy in Russia. But this is a different situation to at least recent previous presidencies. The reason I don't think that this authoritarian turn is a matter of hot alarm today is because of institutional pluralism in the United States, number one. And number two, because Trump is so profoundly incompetent at implementing his authoritarian turn, his sort of soft coup, his attack on the civil service, his attack on state capacity, his attack on regulatory agencies, counter-majoritarian institutions. That attack has been undermined by Trump's tariffs debacle, for instance. A solid, hard-nosed authoritarian would never do that. And that's why Trump poses an existential threat to US democracy, but a greater threat than Trump is likely to arrive in the 2030s or the 2040s. So the way to battle Trump's authoritarianism is partly with the notion that you've got to defeat it, but partly with the notion that you've got to use your attempt to defeat it as practice for battles with greater authoritarian threats to come. What's the effect of what Maher presented us with the quotes that he came up with about his visit? I think the effect is that a suspicion is invited that Maher is playing down the totalizing nature, to quote Ezra Klein again, of the change that Trump's brought about because of the totalizing change that Trump has brought about, and because Maher is personally uncomfortable with it. It could affect him. Trump's not a president like previous ones. And I'm just repeating this. All the doors are open for the suspicion that Maher is not just leaving out the somewhat totalizing nature of the change, but he's leaving out the totalizing nature of the change because of the totalizing nature of the change and how it might affect him. So the cumulative impression is that Trump is in the end a force for civilization. even though he gets things wrong and often behaves destructively. And that, I think, is a sort of trip up in one's handling of that dance with the pressure to be conciliatory with your increasingly authoritarian government. The structure of what we've said, forget Bill Maher, is really, really important in all kinds of ways, and we'll be cultivating it and reapplying it to future cases. And in a way, this affects everybody as our democracies, little by little, take authoritarian turns. Lots of love.